best dancers from across the globe are about to join me for the audition of a lifetime.
ABC Mondays. Do they have what it takes to compete and be the next Dancing with the Stars pro?
I'm here to win.
Nothing is going to stop me.
Our star judges will decide.
This is what hunger looks like.
It was 100% a wrong choice.
Robert Irwin hosts.
The next era of ballroom starts right here on Dancing with the Stars, The Next Pro.
All new Mondays, 8/7 Central on ABC, next day on Hulu.
When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
Welcome to Unbound, the podcast with Beth Curry, author, storyteller, and survivor. This is where books meet real life, where Beth reads chapters from her work and breaks free from the traditional audiobook format, diving deeper into the personal experiences, lessons, and liberation behind every page. Nothing is off limits. Let's get Unbound.
Hi, welcome back to Unbound. I'm Beth Curry, and I'm glad you're here. This is Season 4, Invisible Daughter. Over the last 2 episodes, we kind of spent some time getting to know all about the good girl identity and how it gets built. The praise and the conditioning and the trap and the perfectionism and the price tag of it all. So today I want to talk about what comes next, because once that identity is established, once the family system knows who you are and what you're capable of, that's when the assignments start arriving. And they don't arrive all at once, right? If someone handed you the full job description on day 1, you'd hand it right back. That's not how it works, right? It works, I've talked about boiling the frog before, kind of that same idea. It kind of works the way a slow tide works. You don't notice the water rising until you're kind of standing in it up to your neck. So this is what I call the apprenticeship. So today I'm going to talk about how it works and what it costs and why so many of us didn't see it coming until we were already probably decades deep. So how it begins, it doesn't really follow a single script, right? It does adapt to your family structure, like your birth order and your circumstances. And some daughters are trained through managing younger siblings, and others are trained kind of as the emotional center of the household. Some are trained through crisis, and some are just kind of trained through just like a quiet daily accumulation. But the one thing that's consistent, the curriculum itself is never really announced, right? Nobody sits you down and says, starting today, you are responsible for the emotional functioning of this family, right? Instead, it kind of happens through a series of small escalations, and each one is reasonable on its own. It's also building on the last one. So, like I talked about in the early years, elementary school age, right? The training is foundational. You're learning to read, emotional atmospheres. You're learning to notice when a parent might be stressed out before they've even said a word, right? And you start to adjust your behavior to kind of reduce the pressure in the room. And you also learn to offer comfort before anybody asks for it. Nobody calls this labor in this particular situation. They call it maturity, right? And it's not deliberate. Like the people who are training their daughters to be like this don't even realize they're doing it. And then by middle school, the complexity kind of increases, right? So now you're not just reading the room, you're managing the whole entire thing, right? You're kind of translating between family members who don't speak directly to each other and maybe covering for somebody's mistake before it becomes an even bigger problem. And you start to anticipate emotional needs before they tip into that crisis zone. And then by high school, you're kind of coordinating, right? You're planning, you're carrying information for like your entire family system. And you're most often sacrificing your own opportunities just to keep this family stability. And you're doing it willingly because by now the role feels like yours, right? It feels like you. It's all you know. And then by adulthood, you're kind of running full operations, crisis coordinator and communication hub, emotional processor, logistics manager for multiple people across multiple systems. No job title, no compensation, and absolutely no end date whatsoever. So just a reminder, I spoke with dozens of people, individuals, siblings, different family units. I did one-on-ones. I did group sessions. I got so much information to work with. And I'm going to share some stories from people. Some of them asked to remain anonymous, so I'll just use their initials. And some I will actually name. I'm going to start with someone named Claire because her story kind of shows this escalation more clearly than almost any other I've come across. Claire traces her training back to about age 7. She said her parents divorced and she kind of became her mom's primary emotional support. Not officially, not intentionally. It just happened. Just I guess the way that these things always just kind of happen. She says it started small. She said her mom would cry and she would hug her and tell her everything would be okay. And she called her little angel and told Claire that she didn't know what she would do without her. And Claire was about 7, she said. And she said that felt like love. And it was love, but it was complicated and completely unfair to place on a child. Claire says by 9, she was doing more than offering comfort. Now she was listening to detailed accounts of legal disputes and financial stress, and she was learning exactly what combination of words would soothe her mom's anxiety, and she was deploying them strategically because she learned that her mom's emotional state kind of set the temperature of the whole house. Claire says, I became really good at saying exactly what she needed to hear. I could predict what would calm her down, what would help her sleep. I thought it was love. I didn't realize I was being trained to be her therapist. She says by middle school, she was forging her mom's signature on school forms. She was calling doctors' offices. She was managing logistics that no kid should manage. She says every adult who witnessed it praised her for being so mature and so responsible and so capable. She said she was 12 and handling things that most adults avoid, and nobody asked if she wanted the responsibility. It just became who she was. Now, Claire stayed in that role all the way into adulthood. By 35, she was still managing her mom's life, medical coordination, financial oversight, emotional support. But she was also trying to build her own career and trying to maintain her own relationships. She says the difference now is that I recognize it for what it is. But by the time I figured it out, the pattern was so established that changing it felt like dismantling my entire identity. So in this case, the job didn't just get assigned to Claire, it became Claire. And that's what makes it so hard to walk back from, right? Because you're not changing behavior, you're questioning who you are. So I want to take a second here to name something that, I don't know, I just the training ground looks different depending on where you sit in the family, right? I'm the youngest daughter in my family. My training wasn't about managing younger siblings or running practical household operations, right? It was a lot more subtle and in some ways more total. The younger daughter often becomes the family's emotional center by default, not because she's been assigned authority over others, but because she's the most attuned, right? The most sensitive, the one who feels the undercurrents that everyone else kind of moves through without even noticing, right? Now, where an older daughter might be trained to manage logistics and people, the youngest is often trained to manage feelings, to soften those harder moments and bridge silences and just absorb what no one else will name, She kind of becomes the family's emotional processor. Not its manager, but its nervous system, right? And the praise that she receives is different too. She's not called responsible or capable. She's called sensitive and intuitive and wise beyond her years. My goodness, did I ever get that a lot? But the words are softer and the weight is equally heavy, okay? So I talked to someone else named Rose, and she describes growing up as the youngest daughter this way. She said, my older sisters could walk into a room full of tension and not register it at all. I felt it the moment I crossed the threshold, and I would automatically start trying to fix it by making a joke or changing the subject or finding ways to reduce the pressure in the air. I thought everyone experienced rooms that way. I didn't realize until I was an adult that I was the only one in my family who took responsibility for what I felt. So Rose never managed a household either. She never coordinated care or logistics or anything like that. But by her 30s, she was the first person every family member called first, right? Not because she was the most organized, but because she made people feel better. Because she absorbed their distress and gave it back to them, transformed. And, that's its own form of like invisible labor too, right? Now, when there are multiple daughters in a family, the invisible labor often gets divided between them, but not equally and not always obviously. Okay. So what tends to happen is that different daughters get assigned different aspects of the work. One becomes the practical manager, like handling logistics and coordinating schedules and kind of managing those more concrete details. And then another one has to handle the feelings and the mediation of conflicts and provide comfort and connection. Like she's more the emotional manager. Both roles are exhausting, but they're exhausting in like different ways, which makes it hard for sisters to see each other's labor clearly, right? So like the practical manager thinks the emotional one has it easier because her work isn't tangible, but the emotional manager thinks that the practical one has it easier because at least her work gets acknowledged, right? And instead of recognizing that they're both being asked to carry too much, they direct their frustration at each other. So I talked to Nadia and she tells me this. My sister resented me for years because she thought I had it easier. She was managing household logistics while I was, in her words, just talking to people. But emotional labor is still labor. Being the one who holds everyone's feelings, mediates every conflict, and makes sure nobody feels unseen, that is exhausting in ways that are real, even when they're invisible. So the situation becomes particularly charged when one daughter tries to step back from the assigned role as well, right? The family doesn't let the labor disappear. It just kind of redistributes it, usually onto the other daughter, which kind of creates this conflict between sisters who should be allies over a problem that was never theirs to solve in the first place. So something, that you don't get told about with the apprenticeship. There is no graduation ceremony. Okay. You don't age out of the invisible daughter role. The responsibilities don't decrease. They actually expand. Each life stage kind of brings these new assignments and these new expectations and new ways that the family system routes its needs through you. So in your 20s, the training kind of expands beyond your immediate family to include extended family and friends and colleagues. You become the person everyone calls. You're the one who organizes and the one who remembers. And when you enter this, like a partnership, like a marriage or moving in with a partner, you often transfer these patterns directly, right? Becoming the one who manages the household's emotional climate and maintaining relationships with extended family. And you're carrying the mental load now for two people's lives instead of one. And then, when your parents start to age, an entire new layer of coordination, advocacy, and emotional support gets added to everything already in motion, right? I spoke with Donna. She's 52. She traces her invisible labor back to early childhood. The peacekeeper in a chaotic household, the one who redirected tension before it exploded. She says she was 8 when she started managing her parents' moods. Everyone said I was such a sweet kid, so good at making people feel better. I didn't know that was a job description. But now at 52, Dawn is managing her mom's declining health. She's supporting her daughter through a difficult life transition, and she's serving as the primary emotional coordinator for her extended family. She says, I realized the other day that I've been in active crisis management mode for over 40 years. The training was so complete that it became the whole of me. This is a common theme. So before I end today's episode, I just want to say something genuine. This is not a consolation prize. It's just an honest acknowledgement. The apprenticeship gave us real things, okay? Emotional intelligence that most people spend years trying to develop. It's given us the capacity to hold, I'll use this word again, complexity. It's the best word for it. To stay present in difficulty and to find the words that open rather than close. Right? It taught us crisis management skills, the ability to kind of remain grounded when everything around us is falling apart. It taught us communication abilities that organizations would probably pay significant money to cultivate in their leaders, right? These are not nothing. They're genuinely valuable and sophisticated human capacities. The problem was never that we developed them, though. The problem was that we were trained to use them exclusively in service of others without anyone ever teaching us that these same skills could be turned inward, right? That we could use our emotional intelligence to understand ourselves and our crisis management abilities to kind of navigate our own lives and our communication skills to advocate for our own needs. The training ground taught us to care. What comes next is learning to include ourselves in that circle, right? So in the next episode, I'm going to go into two of the most concrete and relentless chapters in this series, the mental load and the emergency contact role. You know, if you've ever lain awake at 2 o'clock in the morning through everyone else's schedules while your own needs kind of are put in the waiting room, I guess, the next episode's for you. One question to carry until then, because I like to drop a little something to make you guys think. What responsibility came into your life so gradually that by the time you noticed it, you could not even imagine putting it down? I'll see you next episode.
Thanks for listening to Unbound with Beth Curry. Join the conversation in the Facebook group or visit author.bethcurry.com. Want to support the show? Head to ko-fi.com/unbound podcast. Until next time, stay unbound.